put your head down. Hey, 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 hey. I got my hands in my pockets, kicking these rocks. It's kind of hard.
Well, good evening and welcome to the Carolyn Holt Show. I am thrilled and tickled pink that you've chosen to join me this evening. Tonight, because of the passing of the legendary comic and activist Dick Gregory, that's what we're going to talk about on tonight's show. But before we get to the discussion about his life, in particular his activism, I just want to talk about the eclipse today. I did actually get to see it on television, and it really was something to behold. And what I really was impressed with is that in every site that they showed on TV, it was the uniformity of the eclipse. It looked basically the same at every stop. So I was really impressed with that because, many times people tend to be very cynical about God and the universe, but I thought it was on full display today, and I really appreciated the commentary of people who were actually eyewitnesses to the eclipse, because it certainly did seem to make a major impact on their lives and in the lives of their children, because many people brought their entire families to events around not only here in Southern California and on the West Coast, but just around the United States today. So it was quite something to behold, and I hope that you had the opportunity to witness the eclipse as I did, and I thoroughly enjoyed it, and I can't wait to experience another one. So I had a good time. But over this past weekend, like I said, the legendary Dick Gregory passed away at 84 years old. My goodness, it's wonderful to be able to live a long life and have a lot of layers, as Mr. Gregory did. As many of you might know, he grew up in poverty. And many times when a person grows up in poverty, the expectation regarding that individual is not much. I mean, people don't expect much from them, and many times that can, I would say, rub off on the individual, and they may not expect much from themselves. But Mr. Gregory disproved that, and from all accounts was a wonderful human being. He didn't just talk the talk, he did the walk as well. Many times that's the problem. People do a lot of talking, but there's no physical evidence to prove anything that they actually believed in. But Mr. Gregory certainly did leave his footprint in the lives of, I would say, those he touched physically and had interaction with, and those who just had the good fortune to read about him and to study his life and to learn about him in that way. But tonight, I'd like to talk about his activism, because even though I knew who he was, I didn't realize all the major events that have happened in history that he was a part of. He really was not just a comedian. He really did believe in being physically involved in the things that he thought was important. And the main reason I want to talk about him is because I think he really is a shining example to young people about how you live who it is that you say that you are. I hear people making statements all the time about who they say they are, but when you check the lifestyle, it doesn't match up with the words. But I believe that Dick Gregory was truly one of those individuals who lived what he honestly believed. The Washington Post did a great expose on his life, and that's where I'm going to be sharing from, is the Washington Post. And this particular writer is T. Reese Shapiro. And it says that Dick Gregory, he rose to prominence in the early 1960s as a black satirist whose audacious style of humor was biting, submersive, and topical, mostly centered on current events, politics, and racial tension. His trademark was the searing punchline. And today I was reading some of his jokes, and I would say that's true. Apparently he had the joke about eating in a restaurant, and the waitress comes to him and says that, "Oh, I'm sorry, we don't serve colored people in this restaurant." And he said, "Well, that's fine with me because I don't eat colored people, so it's okay that you don't serve them." So he really did have the art of not only the punchline, but the art of the comeback, because many times when people say unkind and nasty things to you, they're expecting you to just fall apart because they've said something. But Mr. Gregory, who, as I stated earlier, having grown up in poverty, I'm sure he knew a lot of things, because in his autobiography titled Nigger, he talks about some of the really awful things that happened to him, not only as an adult, but as a child, a very young child, because he was out in life very early, making a way and a life for himself. And some pretty awful things happened to him. But he credits the fact that his mom, who suggested that, you can either laugh or cry about the things that happen to you in life, and she felt that the best way to handle the adversities in life is certainly to laugh about it. And so she was a great inspiration to him in terms of him developing his comedic style. He once made the statement that a Southern liberal, he said, that's a guy who will lynch you from a low tree. And I'm thinking, my goodness, being lynched, period, let alone how the tree hangs is awful enough. But I guess he could see a distinction in how a Southern liberal might treat you. And another punchline I guess he was very famous for was that he said, when I get drunk, I think I'm Polish. One night, I got so drunk, I moved out of my own neighborhood. And on segregation himself, he says, I know the South very well. I spent 20 years there one night. So I guess he had some really trying and awful experiences that caused him to make such a statement, and a very biting one. But Mel Watkins, who's a journalist and a scholar and a historian of African American comics, had some very insightful details about Mr. Gregory's life, and I'd love to share them with you tonight. He says that Gregory broke the mold among black comedians by by employing political satire at a time when audiences expected black performers to do minstrel skits in baggy pants, outsized shoes, and the use of slapstick humor. Well, Dick Gregory worked very hard at his craft, so he knew how to deliver his point. So I'm not sure why it was an expectation other than I guess that was merely a sign of the times, and that's what black comedians were thought to only be capable of doing. But that was not Dick Gregory. Mr. Watkins also says that he was a front-line activist. He marched in Selma, which I did not know. He was jailed in Birmingham. He was shot in the leg during the 1965 Watts riots here in Los Angeles. He witnessed his pregnant wife being kicked in the stomach by a white sheriff. Now, I know that really did take some personal restraint, because kicking of any kind is awful enough, but the kicking of your wife by a man, and especially when she's pregnant, I would think it's almost impossible to endure. But apparently, Mr. Gregory was an eyewitness to such an event. And not only that kind of event, he was his career took a backseat to his activism, and he counted Reverend Dr. Martin Luther King Jr., Malcolm X, and Medgar Evers as his confidants, because he felt that they certainly were on the front line in terms of making changes here in America, and he knows that they understood the plight that he had in terms of trying to make inroads into comedy, into a belief system that only he could express the way he wanted it to be seen by others. And, when you have a belief system that goes against the grain, it's often very hard to get people to listen. But because of his very biting humor, he was able to captivate people because he knew what he was talking about. It wasn't that he was just standing up and making fun of people. He actually did know his subject very well. And this was one of the hallmarks of his ability to win over audiences who had already purposed in their heart that no matter what he said or what he did, they were not going to be supportive and they were not going to like what he was talking about. But when you're good at your craft, it does not matter what the audience has decided. You're the king of the castle at that moment, and it's up to you to deliver, and apparently he did. Well, he had a very long career and did many things, and I'm going to go to break, and when I come back, we're going to talk some more about some of the things he did in terms of activism. Stay with me.
Mastering math can be big fun for you and everyone. Play it each and every day. Master math the easy way. Say it, play it, Math Maze.
Why not turn math time into fun time with Math Maze, the new game craze? Get yours today at mathmaze.us.
Mom, now you can help your son master math and have big fun. Play it each and every day. Master math the easy way. Say it, play it. Math Maze.
Make sure your child owns the skills necessary for success in high school algebra. Get it now. Mathmaze.us. Mathmaze.us.
And now you can help your daughter play it like you know you oughta. Play it each and every day. Master math the easy way. Say it, play it. Math Maze.
Math Maze cards contain both Spanish and English. Get yours today at mathmaze.us. That's mathmaze.us.
Thank you so much, and welcome back to the Carolyn Holt Show. Tonight we're talking about comedian Dick Gregory and all the wonderful things that he did in terms of his activism. There's a lot known about his comedy, and it's often mentioned that he was an activist, but the details in terms of some of the things that he involved himself in, they're very, very much, I feel, enlightening. And so I want to share some more of the things that he did in terms of his stance. In 1965, Mr. Gregory led a march protesting de facto school segregation from Chicago's City Hall to the home of Mayor Richard Daley. Now, when you think about it, 1965, you have to be pretty bold because at that time there's a lot of unrest going on, and a lot of the laws from Jim Crow South, they're just starting to be examined and possibly dismantled. So it's a lot of stuff going on, and this is a bold step to be certain enough about your position to not only be in disagreement with what the mayor of a major city like Chicago is doing, but to challenge him. And he often said that he was an agitator and he didn't have a problem with provoking people. And so he led this march to the mayor's home. And it says, even though the protest was peaceful, he, along with several protesters, were arrested for disorderly conduct, and they were pelted by rocks and eggs. And in 1969, the U.S. Supreme Court unanimously reversed the conviction by saying there was no evidence that Mr. Gregory and the protesters were responsible for violence. That's just a win within itself for the Supreme Court to actually acknowledge the truth of the matter. Mr. Gregory, he had no problem in terms of standing up and pointing out what was right, because in his heart, that's really what he wanted to do with his life. He wanted to somehow help mankind to see that kindness is a very important thing to embrace. I think as a child, he often saw so many unkind things, so that he decided as an adult he would make kindness one of the mantras in his life. So he was always trying to invoke kindness, even though the situation may not have looked that way. It says that amid the legal case, Mr. Gregory ran for mayor against Richard Daley in 1967 and for U.S. president in 1968 as a write-in candidate with the left-wing Freedom and Peace Party. Well, I know this is probably something that I should have known, but I did not know that. And it says that he got about 50,000 votes. But I'm thinking, just think that if he had had the support that the two major parties generally have in terms of money and in terms of constituents and in terms of name recognition, he may have been able to succeed at being president. I think it's a very wonderful pursuit if that's what you want to do. And I believe that leaders tend to gravitate toward being president because it is a huge spotlight, and it is certainly a way for you to express your platform. The thing that I believe is so impressive about Mr. Gregory and how it relates to young people today, he did not worry about if there was a platform in place. His belief was, well, if it was not, then he was it, and he would do whatever was necessary to bring light to injustices. And I think that this is a good thing for young people, because just the other day I was reading about in the NFL this year how there's a major problem, I guess, with Colin Kaepernick from last year in terms of his stance regarding Black Lives Matter, and the NFL having, I guess, quarterback positions available, and he was not selected as of the weekend. Something may have changed today, but he had not been selected to fill one of those positions. And so sometimes you do have to lose in the beginning in order to gain in the long term. And that's not always an easy lesson to buy into, and it's not always an easy thing to have happen to you. But Mr. Gregory was certainly a man of his convictions, and he stood his ground, and I applaud him for making a run for president in the tumultuous 60s, and especially in 1968 when America was in disarray in many areas. But it says that his campaign platform was to campaign against what he saw as rampant corruption in the two major parties. The unfortunate thing is that many people feel that has not changed. They still believe that we should have more than the two representations that we currently have in terms of the Democratic Party and the Republican Party. The belief is that because they have been in existence for so long that they're not really there to serve the desires of the people, that both parties are there to ultimately serve the desires of the person that gets elected. And an argument can be made for the possibility of having more political parties. I think it opens up thought, and it certainly opens up dialogue. So I can understand his disenchantment with both parties, because often they do seem out of touch with the realities that Americans are facing. So I can certainly understand him having the position that he did. It also says that Mr. Gregory said that he was appalled that the Democratic Party hosted its national convention that year in Chicago, where black protesters were regularly brutalized by the police. And I think that he makes a very good point, and I think that it was a really bad PR move on behalf of the Democratic Party, and not just the Democratic Party, but any party that would say that they represent the people, and at the same time black people are beaten and mistreated, and they had many things happen to them, and nothing is done about it, and then you reward the city by holding your big campaign rally there. I can see why he thought something was wrong with that, because I think if the average human being really stop and think about that, it doesn't make any sense. Why would you support a decision such as that? I mean, there are a lot of major cities in the United States, and if it was that much unrest in the city of Chicago, then I agree. They should not have held a convention there and not had something done about the political climate and the police brutality that was obviously going on. They shouldn't have sanctioned it by saying, oh, okay, well, even though these things are going on, we're still going to have a big party. So I agree with him that should not have taken place. It says that this convention drew a large contingent of white anti-Vietnam protesters, and the outbreak of violence that ensued caused Mr. Gregory to take a mordant glee in the melee. It says that he laughed because he said the whole world is going to change because white folks is going to see white folks beating white folks. And so he found great humor in the fact that the truth of what was really going on in America would finally be seen by some of the people who didn't even want to see the truth. So his wife couldn't understand when she saw him laughing. She was going, well, what are you laughing at? And, you know, normally it was race against race, but in this particular protest, the irony of it was that these were white people who opposed the war, fighting against people who didn't see anything wrong. So there you have it. It says that Mr. Gregory took part in highly publicized fasts for peace during the Vietnam War, which forged a friendship with ex-Beatle John Lennon. And I don't know if any of you ever have tried to fast before. It's not an easy thing to do. And from my understanding, Mr. Gregory could fast up to like 40 days at a time. And I guess in many cases it was what is considered a complete fast. I guess he just had liquids and no solid food. So I really applaud him because I have done fasting before, and it's just not an easy thing to do. You really do have to get in touch with your spiritual side, especially if it's more than a day or so. So I really applaud him because in his mind fasting really did solidify his position. And if you think about it, in fasting you have to give up something, and the main thing you have to give up is food. So if you want to convince somebody that you are serious about what it is that you say you believe in, then fast and see how many people that will be willing to go along with you and support you. It also says that in 1980, he traveled on his own to Tehran on a mission to free Americans held at the U.S. Embassy and began a fast that reduced him to 97 pounds. Now, I've read more than one account of this, and some say 97, some say 106 pounds, but whatever it was, I mean, Mr. Gregory, he was a tall, thin man, but being as tall as he was and only weighing 97 to 106 pounds, that's a major weight loss, and you certainly have to be convicted to follow through on a fast such as that, and you have to really believe in the cause. So I applaud him for his diligence in the way that he made sure that his message and his position was not overlooked. It says that Dick Gregory always considered himself more than a comic. He was also a conspiracy theorist, allegedly. It says that he once was arrested for wrapping yellow crime scene tape across the front gates of the CIA for what he alleged was the agency's involvement in distributing crack cocaine in inner cities. Well, we do know this for sure, that crack cocaine was a very destructive force in the inner city. And we do know that it had to get there in some way. And his contention and his belief was that there were people in America who were directly responsible for the awful destruction that crack cocaine took in terms of the black community. And Mr. Gregory, I'm not sure why people call it a conspiracy theory, because he was a very thorough man and a very thorough person in terms of getting involved. And so if he made the assertion, it was based on some kind of verification and some kind of documentation, because he was not the kind of person that simply behaved and acted out based on emotion and misinformation. As the kids say, that's just not how he rolled. So I'm not sure why it was called a conspiracy theory. I don't know what happened in this situation, if the CIA did cover something up. That part I don't know, but I do trust the behavior of Mr. Gregory, because it is validated in that if he took a position, it was based on information and not just acting out of emotionalism. So I say that he knew something, so we're going to leave it at that. It says that Dick Gregory did suffer for his political convictions, but unlike Muhammad Ali, Gregory was conscious of his role from the beginning and knew that his presence at Southern demonstrations would save lives. And, you know, often in life, you're met with circumstances that force you to look at the bigger picture and the greater good. And it is true that sometimes a sincere person or a famous person can show up for a particular cause, and the cause can look differently and change on a dime in terms of the support, just based on who shows up. And so Mr. Gregory, being the student that he was, he made sure that he always understood what the larger picture was. What was his intent? What was his reason for being where he was? Why did he do what he did? Well, it was because he understood that there were a lot of things that were going on simultaneously, but yet he knew that if he showed up and he made a sacrifice, then whatever the cause was, it would get noticed, and perhaps some of the things that needed to be done to rectify the circumstances of whatever the cause was about, he knew that he could make that happen. And that's a great thing to know about yourself, is that if you choose to become involved, that your involvement means something. And so it's a great takeaway in terms of moving forward that whatever it is that you do it with conviction so that it can have the maximum impact and result that you're looking for. As I mentioned earlier, that Mr. Gregory had a very challenging childhood, and it says that as a child, he and his siblings were on relief perpetually, and I assume that's some kind of a welfare program or something. I'm not sure what relief is, but that's the leap that I'm going to make. He says that his alcoholic dad was largely absent. He and his siblings didn't have suitable clothes to wear and would wear their mom's dresses to go outside and play while the kids laughed and made fun of him. He knew that he was funny and had an audience every day. Well, I can't imagine, especially male children, having to endure being laughed at by their peers because of the level of poverty that they lived in. But it's an encouraging thing to know that it did not dash his hope or any of the fire that he had about his belief system, because children, as we all know, they can really be hard and harsh to their peers. But I cannot imagine what that must have felt like. But to have him say that it didn't matter what they said and what they did, because he knew that he was funny. So he knew that he had something, as they say, in his back pocket that could overcome such conditions. And that's probably what his mom was talking about when she always encouraged him to, you had two options. You could laugh about some of life's really awful situations, or you could cry. So I think that's one of those situations that it's hard not to cry. But as he taught us, it's not how you start in life, but it's how you finish, and what a finish he had. So I think that's an excellent lesson for young people to know that there may be situations in your life that cause people to make fun of you and laugh and giggle and put you down. But at the end of the day, it's not about what they think. It's about what you think about yourself that makes the difference. And apparently Mr. Gregory and his siblings, they, at the end of the day, thought a lot about themselves, and they didn't let the laughter from their peers affect them in any way. They were still able to survive and get through the situation. It says that he was a distinguished runner in high school and was accepted to Southern Illinois University at Carbondale and became captain of the cross country and track teams and won many championships. I don't know if you are aware of this, but as I said at the beginning of the show, the eclipse, one of the cities that they covered was Carbondale, Illinois, and they were at this same university today. So I just thought it was pretty interesting that he passed away this weekend, and the eclipse, one of the ones that you could see really well, happened at a place where he spent a lot of time. I found that very interesting and very telling. It says that he left college after 2 years and joined the Army, where he entertained GIs in the talent contest. His prowess for joke-telling spurred his desire for a show business career. He moved to Chicago, and worked at the post office and many other jobs before he really his comedy career really took off. It says that in 1959 he married Lillian Smith, and together they had 11 children. In his off hours, he was a master of ceremony in black clubs, earning $10 a night. He briefly owned his own club, but supported himself by his wife's small secretarial salary. So he did understand, having grown up in a family, I think it was 6 siblings in terms of his family, but having grown up in a fairly large family, he understood family and the necessity for having one. It's in some, I guess, information and literature, they said that his comedy career and his activism often took him away from his own children. But I guess he was able to square that because he, in the pursuit of work, he did have a family in terms of a wife to be supportive and to help him. And so even though he himself may have been physically gone, he did present a stable household and family life for his children. And it is also said that he got his big break in 1961 when Hugh Hefner requested that he perform one night at Chicago's Playboy Club, and he was a substitute, I guess, for a popular comedian, Irwin Corey, who canceled at the last minute. And I read somewhere that I guess it cost a quarter in order for Mr. Gregory to be able to get to the club to perform, and he didn't have a quarter, and he ended up borrowing the quarter from his landlord in order to make his appearance at the Playboy Club. Now, it's my understanding that a lot of things happen at the Playboy Club, and I'm still trying to figure out how his comedy fit into some of the things that happened at the Playboy Club, but what do I know? Maybe it was a good fit. But it really did help his career in a very positive way. And I'm going to go to break, and when I come back, I'm going to finish up some of the interesting facts that happened regarding Dick Gregory's life. Stay with me.
Mastering math can be big fun for you and everyone. Play it each and every day. Master math the easy way. Sing, play it, Math Maze.
Why not turn math time into fun time with Math Maze, the new game craze? Get yours today at mathmaze.us.
Mom, now you can help your son master math and have big fun. Play it each and every day. Master math the easy way. Sing, play it, Math Maze.
Make sure your child owns the skills necessary for success in high school algebra. Get it now. Mathmaze.us. Mathmaze.us.
And now you can help your daughter play it like you know you oughta. Play it each and every day. Master math the easy way. Say it, play it, Math Maze.
Math Maze cards contain both Spanish and English. Get yours today at mathmaze.us. That's mathmaze.us.
Thank you so much for joining the Carolyn Holt Show this evening. We're talking about comedian Dick Gregory, who passed away on this weekend. And I, after doing some research, found his life to be very fascinating. You hear him normally referred to as comedian and activist. But tonight I'm sharing with you some of the actual things that he did hold near and dear to his heart, and some of the things that he actually participated in. When he was hired by Hugh Hefner to perform at the Playboy Club, it said that the manager stopped him when he showed up at the club because he felt the audience was hostile. The audience that night, it was a bunch of white Southern food executives. And so the manager was a little concerned that things may get out of hand. But it says that Mr. Gregory took the mic anyway and was met by a heckler who uttered a racial epithet. And Mr. Gregory calmly explained that he had an arrangement with the club to receive $50, a bonus, for each time someone used that epithet word, and he asked the audience to just keep saying it because it was putting money in his pocket. So if they wanted to make him a wealthy man that night, then go ahead. It says that he won over the audience that night, which led to a profile in Time magazine and an invitation to appear on the Jack Paar show. It says that many times he played the provocateur as he rose to national consciousness. He wrote in his 1964 autobiography, Nigger, that so that any time the slur was spoken, it would serve as advertising for the book. And this strategy worked because it says that it quickly became a bestseller. And Gregory, he took this opportunity to really express who he was and what he wanted. And he said that the most important thing to him was he wanted a world without malice and hate. And this is according to Milton Estro, who was the writer for the story in the Time magazine. It says that in the 1970s, Gregory started to make his comedy career secondary to his broadening activism, because out of his activism, his interest grew in causes such as eliminating world hunger, ending capital punishment, improving health care for black kids, and he also became a vegetarian out of his commitment to nonviolence, and that led to his unlikely career as a diet guru. It says that in the 1980s, he began a venture called Dick Gregory Enterprises. It was a maker of weight loss and nutritional products that included the Slim, Safe Bahamian diet. He went on the lecture circuit to promote his controversial diet plan, which is said to have brought in $100,000 a month in royalties. He ended up falling out with his business partner, and that venture ended. He suffered some financial setbacks, and it is said that Bill Cosby supported him during his hard times. Many times if a famous person somehow falls down on their luck, it's kind of hard to get anybody to come to your rescue and offer a helping hand. But it is said that Bill Cosby was the person that did that. It also says that in his later years, Mr. Gregory perpetuated public statements regarding his conspiracy theory. This one was about the role that the U.S. government played in the assassination of civil rights leaders, the 9/11 attacks, the rise of the Islamic State terrorist group, and the spread of the Ebola viruses. So in this particular situation, he covered a lot of ground, and it does not say what the outcome of any of those thoughts were, but those were his thoughts. It also says that in 2004, he brought attention to the genocide in Darfur by protesting in front of the Sudanese embassy. He also campaigned unsuccessfully to remove J. Edgar Hoover, his name from the FBI headquarters in Washington, D.C., because he had seen the memos from the 1960s showing the director, J. Edgar Hoover, had plans to neutralize him. And it says that at the very least, Mr. Gregory said that his phone was bugged, at least that's what he believed, and that he often quipped that if you wanted to send a message to the White House, all you needed to do is to just call his house and the message would get through. It is, by all accounts, Mr. Gregory had a very colorful and very successful career in comedy and activism, and he never let an opportunity go by in an effort to make sure that justice was served as fairly as possible. And so I applaud him for his stick-to-itiveness in such trying situations and conditions. And I'd like to close my discussion of Mr. Gregory tonight by a quote that he wrote himself. It must have been this year, because it says that, as I approach my 85th revolution around the sun this year, I wonder why it has been so difficult for humankind to be kind, so difficult to be loving and lovable. For my militant brothers and sisters, don't misconstrue loving and lovable to be weak or submissive. Love will always triumph over hate. I know I will not be here forever, nor do I desire to be. I have seen progress like most cannot appreciate because they were not there to bear witness. I dedicated my life to the movement. By doing so, I never thought I'd still be here. So many of my friends are not here. They were cut down by a system of hatred and evil. If they were here, they would see the progress that I see. The reality is far from perfect, but profoundly better than what daily reality was for my generation. Young folks, if you are wise, you will talk less and spend more time listening to the elders who saw evil up front and personal every day. How long? I've been asking this question for over 40 years. How long before we realize our universal God-given potential? We have made immeasurable progress that cannot be debated. With that said, we still have a long way to go. I have no desire to see this all the way through. The dreams I dreamed 60 years ago have definitely been realized. To the young folks of all ethnicities, I say stay woke, not as a catchphrase, but as a lifestyle. Most of the things that are killing us are in our minds and daily routines. The way we think, the food we eat, and the water we drink or so often don't drink. While so many go out and protest the small evils, the big evils are ever present and welcome into our homes. From the top to the bottom of my heart, I say stay woke. I love you to life. Dick Gregory. So I just want to say thank you so much for joining me tonight. As always, on this show, our goal is to move from misery to magnificence and from subpar to spectacular. And I believe that Dick Gregory was a shining example of that thought. Thank you so much and have a good night.
Mastering math can be big fun. Fun for you and everyone. Play it each and every day. Master math the easy way. Sing it, play it, Math Maze.
Why not turn math time into fun time with Math Maze, the new game craze? Get yours today at mathmaze.us.
Mom, now you can help your son master math and have big fun. Play it each and every day. Master math the easy way. Sing it, play it. Math Maze.
Make sure your child owns the skills necessary for success in high school algebra. Get it now. Mathmaze.us. Mathmaze.us.
And now you can help your daughter play it like you know you oughta. Play it each and every day. Master math the easy way. Say it, play it. Math Maze.
Math Maze cards contain both Spanish and English. Get yours today at mathmaze.us. That's mathmaze.us.